The roles of women have changed. They've evolved. Now, in many ways, for example, women are smarter than men. At least that's what education stats tell us. I would argue women are also incredibly more patient. Are we nodding our heads to that? I would say, yeah, I can give you guys that. However, aside from all of that, one topic of the discussion today that is often visited is the idea of women empowerment. And that's what we're diving into today. But my biggest question is, what is it? So we're going to be discussing today's contrast to history of women's empowerment, personal choices, and what the future should look like. Now, some would say it's different for everyone, but there has to be an underlying message of women empowerment. And that's what we're here to discuss tonight. Here to talk about it is Abby, Huda, and Jackie. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me.
Let's get this started.
Let's get this going. Okay, so I want to talk about the history of women's empowerment because I feel like that's going to kick us off really nicely into segment 2, which is the contrast of today. We were discussing before it's really changed. In what ways has it changed? Jackie, what would you say?
In what ways
Has women empowerment changed? I mean, look at it 50 years ago, 60 years ago versus today.
Grandparents and our mothers and grandmothers didn't really have the choices we have today.
Like what kind of choices?
To vote, how about?
Yeah, that's fair.
A bank account was actually something they couldn't have, the credit card. And also female reproductive. Did you know that you had to ask you had to get a signed?
We have a choice now.
Right.
Almost, like right now we do kind of, right? Like isn't that teetering sort of right now? But there was a time where you had to ask when you're married, if you wanted to have your tubes tied, if you wanted to have any of those, that had to be a decision that your husband made, and then you went to the doctors. That was
really?
Yes.
So when did that change? Like when was that something that changed?
I think it changed in the 80s, and that's not that long ago.
It's crazy when you talk about like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It really doesn't.
40 years has done a lot for females.
40 years
Let's
has
just
done
say
a
that,
lot.
because I have an 18-year-old daughter, and feminism looks very different than what I grew up thinking feminism or women's empowerment was.
What was it birthed out of? Like, Abby, if you look back at the history of women's empowerment, what do you think sparked that motivation to make some sort of change?
Well, I mean, women weren't allowed to vote. They weren't recognized as persons in the law. I think that
eventually they just said, you know what, we're done with this. Like, is that?
I think if you look back traditionally, history speaking, if you look at the books, women empowerment movement came about after World War II, right? When women were actually put in the factories, put as line workers, and men were out there, and we needed more women.
That's when you saw career really started to take
that's when
off.
like the career for women took off. That's when women were actually
They still weren't getting equal pay, though. They still weren't
We
treated.
still aren't
They still weren't
getting
empowered, even though they
Right.
were doing everything that men were doing.
Yeah. And I forget what her name is, but that iconic photo of the woman with her hand with the red.
With the red
yeah,
bandage.
and that came from World War II, when women
Okay.
were actually line workers and factory workers, and they were able to contribute not just to home, but also have careers,
In the
right?
work- in the
and
work
that,
sector.
Yeah. And that was
Interesting.
truly the rise when you look at it from like the books, right?
So I wonder though, did women just not feel empowered at all back then? I mean, I find it hard to
I
believe
think
that
they
women
just-
weren't happy back then
They
at
just
all.
weren't politicians. They just weren't the CEOs. They weren't the board members. I think they were still empowered in their home. A lot of the big choices were made in the home. They were teachers. They were caregivers.
But what sparked that change? Like what said,
Fury? I don't know.
anger? Was it
I think, you know what, if I was-
underappreciation from men? Was it they just didn't feel like they were seen as human beings? Like,
I think overworked. I think once they started actually having careers, women had a voice and they were equal contributors. I mean, if you think about it now, there's this concept that was brought to attention a while back called the double ghetto. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but basically it's like women do 2 shifts. The first shift is they go into work, they get paid for it. They're still underpaid in some cases. They go to work, they get paid. And then when they come home, they have another job, which is unpaid, which is being a caregiver and whatnot. And so if you were to compare that against a man, we've really got 2 jobs that we're doing, right?
Abby, I'm curious to ask you, like, on your point, what do you think about this?
I mean, I think today, I don't think there's really, I don't think women get paid less than men today.
They still do. When you're negotiating CEO, like C-suite level salaries, and women are getting paid less.
Do we still see, like, okay, so where you work, do you find that you're paid less or more or the same?
Well, I'm paid the same. I don't work in like an office setting though, where you have to like negotiate your pay. But I also, I don't know, I think you get paid for your expertise. I think you get there's things that go into it. It's not just.
I think blue
It's
collar and
also-
white collar might be different too.
So we'll get into this, today's contrast. We'll be right back. Today's version of women empowerment is extremely different from its contrasted views of the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, as we were discussing. Whether that's for the better or not, that's why we're here to talk about it. Now, we've kind of explored what the history of female empowerment looked like and some of the things that we wanted to see change, but what still needs to be addressed today that maybe hasn't? Abby, what do you see? Is there anything that needs to be addressed in terms of women empowerment being more empowered today?
Well, I mean, personally, I'd say that women don't really have a choice of whether they work or not anymore. You have to work.
Just
I
based
wouldn't
on
say
today's
that.
economy.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'd say that needs to change for women's empowerment.
I still think like the wage gap is still pretty prevalent, especially when you the higher you climb up the corporate ladder, the more you see it. And I think that still needs a lot of work because women are still underpaid. And I think we're still fighting that fight.
So one of the questions that I'd asked you guys off, and I said, don't respond until the segment kicks on, was, because you guys were talking about this, which I found really interesting, was, is it okay for an employer to consider hiring a female, whether they're going to go with that female or not, based off of the fact that if they plan on having a child within their first year
It's not okay,
of
but
being
it's the
hired,
norm.
but then they're going to take 2 years off? Well, as from the employer's
I would
perspective,
agree with you. It's not
It's
okay.
not okay, but it is the norm. So if we had equality, if it was fair and policies were changed, that wouldn't be something that came into play. If we actually were being paid the same, treated the same, and at the same level in the corporate world.
now women do get 2 years off, I believe, in
Men
Canada.
do too if they want. You can take spousal, like a parental leave.
Yeah, and so then that allows the woman to stay at work, which I would consider quite fair, right? So should an employer consider that? Because I mean, if their employee that they just hired is going to take 2 years off, like think about it from the
Yeah,
employer's
I
perspective. You know what I'm
understand that it
saying?
affects the business, and it's a legitimate question because if I was to put myself on the
business
seat as a business owner, that would be into consideration. But at the end of the day, it's 2024, and I think that companies that strive for equality and strive for giving an equal, fair chance to both parties are the companies that succeed and survive. So if you give that woman the opportunity to hire her and let her perform, and even though she's childbearing, goes back home and has a child, she's coming back more empowered, more focused on her work. And there's now, after COVID, you can also work from home. I mean, there's opportunities to take
I think
on.
some of the bigger companies, like just Google comes to mind. They have childcare and they have everything in, like, so that they can get you back to work sooner if you want. And you have childcare and everything's available for you. Like, they're doing things to put women on equal grounds.
I would say, though, that after having a child, you do change. Your whole brain changes. You're not the same person you were before having the child. And I don't think it is entirely likely. Like, it depends on who you are, what your values are, but it's not necessarily true that you are 100% going to want to go back to work and going to want to,
you might not want to,
going to have the same drive.
So I want to jump to, because I have a question here that I wanted to ask before we get into segment 3, which was, what are some of the areas today that women are being objectified in society? Are there any?
Objectified? You mean like sexually objectified?
Not just sexually.
Because that I find very
Career,
empowering.
finance.
I twist that. So if you think I'm hot, well, I'll take your seat. And your car and your house.
Yeah, I think the women own that now, right? Before, I think there was a lot of like hidden confidence where it's like you don't want to say something, but I think now we're empowered to say what's on our mind, to share our thoughts. But I think when you say the word objectified, it automatically throws me into sexualized versus like sexually objectified versus anything else.
Okay, so one of the questions I have was also is the idea of certain industries have a percentage higher in men or women in terms of the workforce. Typically, that's just based off of the natural interest of females maybe not wanting to be a bricklayer or males not wanting to be an administrative assistant, let's just say, taking two roles that are predominantly one or the other. Do you still think that that's okay? Should we still have those, hierarchies where it's like 90% men in this role and like 80% women in this role?
I think it has to be like that. Like, for example, I mean, working in sewers, I don't want cockroaches crawling all over me. I mean, I'm a truck driver. That's predominantly a male role.
Right.
But I also don't see myself doing it long term, whereas a man could definitely do it for longer because it takes a toll on your body, and men and women are built different.
But women should have the choice. I think that's what we're like the empowerment.
But I think women do have
society.
a choice,
They just have the choice, get the same pay, the same time off, the same the same, whatever the man, like say I want to clean sewers. Does any man really want to do that anyway?
But
So
I would
what are
say,
we talking
I
about?
would make the argument that I think women do have that choice today. Like if a woman wants to be a plumber, they can go be a plumber.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get into personal choices in segment 3. It's already flying by, but we'll be right back. Plenty of women say that women empowerment is dependent on what each woman makes of it. However, some arguments I've heard for that point is this view could inadvertently ignore the need for collective action, making it more of an individualistic approach. Now, as we've covered the history of women's empowerment in today's contrast, discussing some of the personal choices women make around empowering themselves is a crucial part of the conversation. Okay, so let me ask this question point blank and try to give me a quick, articulate response here. What is women's empowerment? Huda, what would you say?
Choice.
Choice?
The ability to make choices
Okay.
for your well-being.
Okay, Jackie, what would you say?
Authentic choices for yourself and challenging social norms. For me, empowerment is, I think I said it earlier, everyone's going right, I go left. That's empowering to me. I make my own decisions. I make my own path. I feel good about it. Society doesn't
Abby.
dictate that for me.
Huda backs
It's
it.
true. I feel empowered.
Abby, what would you say? What is women empowerment?
I mean, women, they have like superpowers. I mean, they can have babies. They're
It's
completely
unique.
different. Yeah.
They're unique.
Yeah, they're different from men. They have, like, we have our own, I don't know, I feel empowered just being home with my kids and being able to care for them and seeing when my husband struggles a little bit and I can step in and just take over. And it comes more naturally.
Do you find that women today are more or less empowered at home, being stay-at-home moms or just being a more traditional outlook?
Definitely less. I remember like working, whenever I would speak to people, they'd ask me, oh, do you like what you do? And I'd be like, yeah, I'd rather be home with my kids. And they'd always say, oh, just give it a few years. You'll be happy to get the break. And
Right.
I don't think that's empowering.
I was a stay-at-home mom for 15 years.
Really?
And raised 2 boys.
And did you feel empowered in that way?
It was a very traditional Catholic Italian home. So it was what it was. And I evolved and life changed. And as you grow, you might feel completely different in 20 years. You might I really love the challenge of working in corporate world. I love the industry. I'm very moved by COVID sort of changed the way I'm taking on like Black Lives Matter. And I like to be an activist. I like to inspire others to think out of the box and to challenge social norms. But I wouldn't have done that when I was raising my children.
Well,
I was barely sleeping and nursing and feeding them. And
well, I would say that, yeah, you have different, as a woman, I feel empowered. I want to be home with my kids when they're young. And then, yeah, when they're older, I have other plans. I'm like, I want to do more with my life as well. But I do think that being an active parent, like actively in your child's life, rather than being at work all day, every day, like it
is truly the greatest job, and it's most rewarding, and it is.
I will say,
you're very
I was raised by
inspiring.
a
I mean,
stay-at-home mom.
talking to you before.
I love stay-at-home moms because I was raised by one, so I'm a little biased in that way. But I mean, women can make their own decision. But I appreciate you saying that, how you feel empowered being at home and raising Freddie and your kids.
I think if we had the choice, I think we don't because of economically, we just don't because of inflation and where we're at, and like it's 2024, we don't have the choice to stay home. But I think if women were given the choice to stay home, a lot of modern women would want to be able to raise.
Do you feel like it's flipping?
It is 100%.
I
say that because Gen Z, you guys are a little different. My daughter is a Gen Z. She's like, I just want to stay home. I want to cook. I want to clean. I want to, bake on Sundays, and I want to enjoy my time. I said, what? Why? And I was like, I've worked so hard. You want to do this? What's the reason? And I think it's having the ability to be feminine. Our generation, I think the millennial women are kind of toss up between, and we've had so many of these conversations, the masculine and feminine energy, right? Our generation has to work and provide, and we're that woman generation that worked and had families at home.
I think a lot because of my generation, where I'm a little older, and generations, even some of the women before, is why we have the opportunity to work and have these choices and get these things. Like that's empowerment. Like it started the Gloria Steinems and the
see what
Jane
you're saying.
Fonda
Let
and whatever,
me ask this
because of their
question.
movements, we get these choices and decisions.
So
And that's why she has the choice.
what
now
I'm
that she
wondering,
does.
it's interesting you say that it's flipping. Abby, I take your perspective a little bit as well. Just the idea that is society almost not forcing, but like really heavily influencing women to take on what were traditionally male roles and men to take on maybe what traditionally female roles were. Is that okay? Are we breaking that natural norm? Like,
I think we are. I do. I don't agree with, this is a little bit contradictory. I 100% support and believe in female empowerment, but I think there's certain limits that we should put on ourselves so that we are not overtaking masculine roles and energies just because we're so empowered. And then that leaves no room for men to enter our lives. And you see that in the
Like, if you
dating
take me
culture.
there, you're paying.
I mean, like you see that.
I gotta cut you off. Okay, we'll be right back.
But you see that in the.
Now, we can agree to disagree on the contrast of today's versions of women's empowerment, how it's far different than the history books we grew up with. However, it's crucial to touch on what the future of female empowerment should look like versus maybe the direction it's headed. Maybe there's some things that we don't fully agree with, or maybe there's some things that we need to wrestle with a little bit more. One of the questions I didn't get to in the last segment that I did want to talk about was the idea of sexual expression, which is something that's come up a lot more with social media. I think you see a lot of females struggling with confidence because of that.
Or they have
Same with men.
and they make millions of dollars and they buy
Right.
their own house and car and they don't need anybody.
And exactly, and there can be a difference in that. So I do want to get on that, is the idea of sexual expression. Does that contribute towards some sort of objectification in women in today's society, or does that help them feel more empowered? Which one is it?
Can I ask you that
Yeah.
question? I want to know, as a guy, what do you think? You're seeing this, right? You're seeing all the women being empowered and
Confidence, a guy likes a woman who's confident. What makes them confident? It's dependent on the guy. So like if the female's confident because she's really sexually expressive on social media, I feel like depending on the guy, they'll be more attracted or less attracted to that. But I don't know, you also see like the Whatever podcast and they're debating with OnlyFans models all the time about how that's wrong or whatever it may be. So I'm curious to get your guys' perspective on that.
I want to know your perspective.
Abby, what's your thoughts?
I don't know why, but I do.
Abby, what do you think?
I mean, I'd say the women may feel that they are empowered, but it's still just for men to look at, really. Like, you're still objectifying yourself. You're still, just because you're the person doing it, I don't know.
But they would do it anyway. At least now you're getting paid. They're doing it anyway. Like when you get catcalled, or when you get the dick pics in your DMs, or you get inappropriate messages,
but you're
you're
not
making money off of it.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay with you.
Totally okay with me.
Oh.
Completely. I'm very empowered. I prefer to be nude, so I'm very, very empowered. One time I was at a party and someone said, "If I gave you $5,000, would you go through the mall naked?" I said, "You could give me $5 and I would go through the mall naked." I'm very empowered by nudity.
I want to know, so in your mind, this is a real question, like in your mind, nudity or sexual empowerment has nothing to do
sex
with...
and nudity are two different things, and pornography is something completely different as well.
So
nudity doesn't
sexualizing
have
yourself
to be,
and being on camera and showing it off to the
No
world, do you
problem.
think that's completely
Nope,
okay?
I traveled the world doing news, weather, and sports, just shoes. That's my job was. And
that was empowering.
Extremely empowering. Yes.
Okay.
Jackie,
That is insane.
So, like, what are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I don't agree at all. It's so weird. And we can have a healthy conversation
I'm also
about
not the
that.
mother of daughters. Right?
Do
So
you
there's a
think
whole
your
different
opinion would be different if you had
I
a daughter?
think it might be. Now
Okay.
that I'm in my 50s
Okay.
and I look back at all this, I think it would be very different. I also think some of the choices I made in my 30s, I wouldn't have made in my 40s, and now I would definitely not make them in my 50s.
Yeah.
Well, you learn as you go, right? And like, I think all of us can admit to that. What I will ask, though, is the future of female empowerment. What does that look like? We talk about sexuality, career, finances, family. Like, I think
all the social norms now, like all of the social norms are being challenged.
Yeah.
So I think
But how far can we challenge those? Like, to what extent do we challenge those where
I do think
it
that
confuses?
the new generation is kind of like taking it back a notch. And I think that's going back to a little bit more, maybe, I don't know. I have a daughter, so maybe I'm just, you know, looking at her and her choices and what she thinks and some of her friends. They are kind of going back to some traditional norms, wanting to kind of have more healthier life balance with family, wanting to have kids, while some women are also have friends that have, you know, frozen their eggs. So now they are more in control of not feeling like they need a man, need to find the next guy and marry him because the eggs are in reserve and they're okay. So it gives them a little bit more confidence.
Guys
back,
definitely
right?
don't get the stress of the timeline, which
my
I
generation
can't
is
fathom.
right away. You had to get married. There was like, you got married, you had children, you know, like that was your.
Abby, I want to let you, because
did.
you kind of followed a different path. So just, we got about 15 seconds, 20 seconds left here. Speak on your view on, you know, the future of female empowerment, where you think it's headed and if you think it's proper.
I mean, where I think it's headed, I don't see women being stay-at-home moms with the way that the economy is going. I think that being an option is a big part of women empowerment, because that is just our natural instincts are to be caregivers, and you can do other things, but it still comes back to that. Like, and it's not an option anymore. And
Well,
I think
listen,
that needs to open up.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate all you ladies coming on the show. We've run out of time. So thank you so much for joining me.
We could go forever.
We want to talk more.
I have so much more to say.
Since I have the last word, do not simply accept what you are told. Challenge your thinking, engage in differences, and listen to new perspectives. Thank you. Have a great night.